in the snowy glow of Holly House. A Christmas Eve party sparkles with laughter until Eleanor Grayson tumbles down the grand staircase, her death deemed an accident. But Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster, sees through the festive facade. A hidden will, a tampered sedative, and a husband drowning in debt unravel a chilling truth. Murder disguised as misfortune, as secrets spill and shadows deepen. Miss Marple sets a cunning trap to expose a killer before justice melts away in St. Mary Mead's Winter Chill. Chapter 1. The gathering at Holly House. The village of St. Mary Mead lay under a pristine mantle of snow, its thatched cottages and winding lanes hushed in the December chill. Holly House, the grandest residence on the high street, glowed like a beacon against the dusk, its mullioned windows spilling golden light onto the frosted lawn. Within, the drawing-room was a tableau of Christmas cheer, a towering fir adorned with glass baubles and tinsel, a crackling fire in the marble hearth, and a long table laden with crystal decanters of mulled wine, mince pies, and silver trays of candied fruits. The air carried the sharp scents of pine, the warmth of spices, and the faint, festive trill of a gramophone playing "O Come, All the Faithful." Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, the hostess, moved through the room with the grace of a dancer, her emerald silk gown catching the candlelight. Her laughter, bright and infectious, rose above the chatter as she greeted her guests, her auburn curls bouncing with each nod. At 35, Eleanor was the picture of vitality, her hazel eyes sparkling with the joy of the season. Yet, to the keen observer, there was a fleeting shadow in her smile, a momentary tightness that hinted at cares unspoken. Her husband, Mr. Leonard Grayson, stood apart, his tall frame rigid by the fireplace. His dark suit was immaculate, his cravat pinned with a pearl that gleamed coldly. At 40, Leonard's handsome features were marred by a perpetual frown, his steel-grey eyes scanning the room with a detachment that bordered on disdain. He raised his glass in a perfunctory toast, his voice clipped as he murmured, "To Christmas and all its blessings." The words rang hollow, and several guests exchanged glances. Miss Jane Marple, a distant cousin of Eleanor's, sat in a high-backed chair near the window, her slight figure almost lost in the folds of her black lace shawl. Her white hair was neatly pinned, her blue eyes deceptively mild behind steel-rimmed spectacles. In her lap, a skein of pale wool unravelled as her knitting. Needles moved with rhythmic precision, producing the beginnings of a child's mitten. To the casual observer, she was merely a quaint spinster, invited out of familial obligation. But Miss Marple's mind was as sharp as her needles, and she missed nothing. The guest list was a curious mix, each arrival noted by Miss Marple with quiet interest. Dr. Harold Finch, the village physician, hovered near the punch bowl, his thin face twitching with a nervous tic. His fingers, stained faintly with ink, clutched his glass too tightly, as if seeking anchor in the festive chaos. Mrs. Clara Wentworth, a widow with a penchant for mauve and melodrama, sailed in with a rustle of taffeta, her sharp tongue already dissecting the season's scandals. Mr. and Mrs. Percival Tate, newlyweds from London, brought a burst of youth to the gathering, their laughter bright but their eyes darting, as if unaccustomed to such grandeur. Miss Lavinia Reed, spinster aunt, entered last, her stooped frame swathed in outdated velvet. She clutched a glass of sherry with knotted hands, her rheumy eyes fixed on Eleanor with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The evening unfolded with the predictable rhythm of such gatherings. Eleanor, ever the consummate hostess, proposed a game of charades, her enthusiasm drawing even the reluctant Leonard into the fray. The guests paired off, their mimicry growing bolder with each round, fueled by wine and the warmth of the fire. Miss Marple declined to play, content to watch from her corner, her needles never faltering. She noted the way Leonard's gaze lingered on Eleanor, not with affection, but with a cold intensity, as if measuring her every gesture. She saw, too, the faint tremor in Eleanor's hand as she passed him a glass, a gesture so fleeting it might have been imagined. As the clock neared midnight, the carolers arrived, their voices rising in the frosty air outside. The guests gathered at the windows, their breath fogging the glass as they joined in silent night. Eleanor, flushed and radiant, excused herself to fetch a shawl from her upstairs boudoir. "It's grown chilly," she said with a laugh, brushing past Leonard, who stood at the foot of the grand oak staircase. Miss Marple, still seated, watched him turn, his eyes following Eleanor's ascent with a look that chilled her. Despite the fire's warmth, the song reached its final verse when a scream shattered the harmony, high and piercing, followed by a dull, sickening thud. The guests froze, glasses clattering to the floor. Dr. Finch was the first to move, pushing through the crowd to the hall, where Eleanor lay sprawled at the base of the staircase, her emerald gown twisted about her like spilled ink. Her head rested at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide and unseeing. Dr. Finch knelt, his fingers seeking a pulse, but his face drained of colour as he shook his head. "She's gone," he whispered. "Her neck, it's broken." A collective gasp rose from the guests. Mrs. Wentworth clutched her pearls, murmuring about cursed houses. The Tates clung to each other, their faces pale. Miss Reed sank into a chair, her sherry spilling unheeded. Leonard stood motionless, his expression unreadable, though his knuckles whitened around his glass. Constable Reed, summoned from the village, arrived swiftly, his young face grim as he surveyed the scene. Miss Marple rose quietly, her knitting tucked into her bag. She approached the body, her eyes taking in every detail: the disarrayed gown, the single slipper missing from Eleanor's foot, the faint bruise on her wrist, half hidden by a lace cuff. The staircase loomed above, its polished banister gleaming in the dim light of a single sconce. Dr. Finch attributed the fall to a misstep, perhaps exacerbated by wine, but Miss Marple's lips pursed ever so slightly. "Such a tragedy," she murmured, her voice soft, but her mind already sifting through the fragments of the evening, piecing together a pattern that others had missed. Chapter 2. The official verdict. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a pale, reluctant light, the snow-laden clouds casting Holly House in a mournful pallor. Inside, the festive glow of the previous night had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards and the muted sobs of the housemaid. Betsy, as she moved through her duties, the drawing-room, once alive with laughter, now stood as a sombre stage, its Christmas finery tinsel, holly, and half-burnt candles seeming almost mocking in the aftermath of tragedy. Eleanor Grayson's body had been moved to the village mortuary, but her absence hung like a spectre over the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated at a small writing desk in her guest room, penned a brief note to her friend Dolly Bantry back in St. Mary Mead, her neat handwriting betraying none of the disquiet that stirred within her. She described the events of the Christmas Eve gathering with her usual economy, but her mind was far from idle. The image of Eleanor's crumpled form at the foot of the staircase, the faint bruise on her wrist, and the cold detachment in Leonard Grayson's eyes lingered in her thoughts, each detail a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to weave. Downstairs, the household stirred uneasily, Leonard Grayson, pale but composed, received the coroner, Mr. Archibald Caldwell, and Constable Ernest Reed in the library. Mr. Caldwell, a brisk man with a walrus moustache and a penchant for efficiency, adjusted his spectacles and surveyed the room with an air of authority. Constable Reed, young and earnest, stood at his side, notebook in hand, his freckled face flushed with the gravity of the occasion. The remaining guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, Mr. and Mrs. Percival Tate, and Miss Lavinia Reed-Lingard. In the drawing-room, their voices hushed as they awaited the official proceedings. Miss Marple descended the staircase with her customary deliberation, her black-laced shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting bag tucked under one arm. She paused at the spot where Eleanor had fallen, her sharp eyes scanning the oak banister and the thick Persian carpet. The hall was well lit now, the sconces casting a steady glow, but she recalled the dimness of the previous night, the single, flickering light that had illuminated Eleanor's final ascent. A faint scuff mark on the carpet, barely noticeable, caught her attention, and she filed it away for later consideration. In the library, Mr. Caldwell wasted no time. "A tragic business, Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice clipped. "Will keep this brief. The evidence suggests an accident, Mrs. Grayson, perhaps unsteady from the festivities. Missed her footing on the stairs. Dr. Finch's initial assessment supports this, and the physical evidence aligns. No signs of foul play, no irregularities on the staircase itself. A sad but straightforward case." Leonard nodded, his hands clasped tightly before him. "Eleanor was spirited last night," he said, his tone measured. "She enjoyed the wine, the games. I should have insisted she rest sooner." His eyes, red-rimmed, met the coroner's briefly before dropping to the floor. A picture of restrained grief. Constable Reed scribbled notes, his pen scratching audibly in the quiet room. "The staircase was inspected this morning, sir," he reported. "No loose treads, no obstructions. The carpet secure, and the banisters solid. The lighting's adequate, though it was dimmer last night, what with only one sconce lit." Mr. Caldwell grunted. "Dim lighting and a glass too many recipe for disaster. I've seen it before. We'll hold a formal inquest tomorrow, but I expect it'll confirm the obvious. Death by misadventure, most likely." He turned to Leonard. "My condolences, sir. We'll need statements from the guests, but I see no reason to detain anyone." Unduly, Miss Marple, who had slipped into the library under the pretense of returning a borrowed book, listened from the doorway, her expression one of polite concern. She noted the coroner's haste, the constable's deference, and Leonard's carefully modulated sorrow. "A terrible shock for us all," she murmured, her voice soft but carrying. "Poor Eleanor, so full of life only hours ago." Mr. Caldwell glanced at her, his moustache twitching. "Indeed, madam, a pity, but these things happen. Carelessness, you know." He gathered his papers, signalling the end of the discussion as the coroner and constable departed. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes drifting to Leonard. He stood by the window, staring out at the snow-covered garden, his posture rigid. She approached, her steps light. "Mr. Grayson, might I stay a few days? I feel I owe it to Eleanor's memory to offer what comfort I can. We were cousins, you know, though distant." Leonard turned, his face a mask of civility. "Of course, Miss Marple, your presence is appreciated." His words were courteous, but his eyes held a flicker of unease. Quickly masked, Miss Marple inclined her head and withdrew, her mind already turning. The coroner's verdict, so swiftly delivered, troubled her. Accidents were convenient explanations, she knew, often cloaking truths too dark to be faced in the light of day. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead some years ago, a farmer's wife found dead at the bottom of a ladder, her death blamed on a broken rung. Only Miss Marple's quiet persistence had revealed the husband's hand in the matter, driven by a mistress and a mortgage. The parallels here were not lost on her. She sought out Betsy, the housemaid, in the kitchen, where the girl was polishing silver with a distracted air. Betsy, barely 19, had a round face and a tendency to blush under scrutiny, but her tongue loosened easily in the presence of Miss Marple's kindly demeanour. Over a cup of tea, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the Graysons' marriage. They was happy enough. At first Betsy said, her hands busy with a tarnished spoon. Mrs. Grayson, she was always laughing, planning parties and such. But lately, there's been Rose. I heard Miss, through the door. Mr. Grayson, he was always on about money, how the business was bad, how they needed more. Mrs. Grayson, she'd get cross, say it was her money, not his to spend. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing counterpoint to Betsy's revelations. Her money, you say? From her family, I presume. Aye, miss. Her father left her a fortune. They say Mr. Grayson's got his business some sort of shipping venture, but it's been failing, or so Cook says. He was always asking Mrs. Grayson to sign papers, but she wouldn't, not lately. Said she'd had enough of his schemes. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of mild interest, though her mind raced. A fortune controlled by Eleanor, a husband in financial straits, and a sudden, fatal foliage piece fit too neatly into a pattern she had seen before. And last night, she said gently, "Did you notice anything unusual before the accident?" Betsy hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "I shouldn't say, miss, but Mr. Grayson was odd, like." He kept to himself, watching Mrs. Grayson. "And just before she went upstairs, I saw him by the staircase, fiddling with the sconce. I thought he was fixing the bulb, but it stayed dim." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained benign. Fiddling with the sconce. How curious. Thank you, Betsy. You've been most helpful. She rose, leaving the girl to her polishing, and made her way to the hall. The staircase, grand and imposing, dominated the entrance hall, its oak treads polished to a mirror sheen. Miss Marple ascended slowly, testing each step, her hand gliding along the banister. At the top, a small mahogany table held a vase of holly, its berries bright against the dark wood. She examined the sconce Betsy had mentioned, a brass fixture with a single bulb. The glass was clean, the bulb intact, but she noted a faint smudge on the switch, as if it had been handled recently. Kneeling, she inspected the carpet again, confirming the scuff mark she had seen earlier, a faint abrasion, as if something heavy had been dragged or pushed. Her inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Wentworth, who bustled into the hall with a rustle of mauve skirts. "Miss Marple, what are you doing, poking about like a detective?" Her tone was half teasing, half curious, her eyes gleaming with the prospect of gossip. Miss Marple straightened, her smile disarming. "Merely satisfying an old woman's curiosity, Mrs. Wentworth. These old houses have such stories in their bones, don't they? But tell me, how are you bearing up after last night's shock?" Mrs. Wentworth needed no further prompting. She launched into a litany of observations, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Eleanor was too lively for her own good, if you ask me. All that wine, and those games, she was bound to trip. But Leonard, oh, he's a cold fish, isn't he? I saw him watching her all evening, not like a husband, more like a hawk eyeing a sparrow. And Eleanor told me, just last week, she was worried about him. Said he'd been pressing her for money, getting quite sharp about it. Miss Marple. Needles resumed their rhythm, a soft click-click that seemed to encourage confidences. Worried, you say? Did she mention anything specific? Mrs. Wentworth leaned closer, her voice barely audible. She said she'd found papers in his studied debts, dreadful ones. She was thinking of seeing a solicitor to protect her inheritance. Oh, Miss Marple, it's too awful to think what might have happened. Miss Marple patted her arm. Now, we mustn't leap to conclusions. Grief can make us see shadows where there are none. But her mind was far from dismissive. Eleanor's fears, Leonard's debts, the dimmed sconce, and the scuff mark formed a constellation of clues, each pointing to a truth the coroner had been too hasty to dismiss. She excused herself and sought out Dr. Finch, finding him in the conservatory, where he was examining a potted fern with undue intensity. His thin face twitched as she approached, his hands fluttering to his pockets. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice strained, "I trust you're managing under the circumstances." "As well as can be expected," she replied, settling onto a wicker chair. "But I confess, I'm puzzled. Eleanor seemed so robust last night, yet you say her fall was fatal. Was there anything unusual in her condition?" Dr. Finch's tick intensified, his eyes darting to the door. "Nothing unusual, no. She'd had a fair bit to drink, as we all did. The stairs are steep, the light was poor. It's a simple matter of physics, I'm afraid. A broken neck, instantaneous." Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but unrelenting, and no other injuries, no signs of, say, dizziness or weakness before the fall. He hesitated, his fingers twisting a button on his waistcoat. "She did mention feeling dizzy a few days ago when I saw her last. I prescribed a mild sedative, perfectly standard, but last night she was herself, full of energy. The wine, perhaps." His voice trailed off, and he turned back to the fern, as if it held the answers he could not provide. Miss Marple thanked him and withdrew, her thoughts racing. A sedative dizziness, a dimmed light, and a husband with motive. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained incomplete. She resolved to speak with the Tates and Miss Reed, hoping their perspectives might add clarity. In the drawing room, the Tates were preparing to leave, their suitcases packed. Mrs. Tate, a pretty blonde with nervous hands, greeted Miss Marple with a strained smile. "We're off to London, Miss Marple's house. It's too sad now." "Quite understandable," Miss Marple said, settling beside them. "But before you go, might you recall where everyone was just before Eleanor's fall?" "My memory isn't what it was." Mr. Tate, a lanky young man with an earnest demeanour, frowned. "We were all in the drawing room, singing with the carolers. But I did see Mr. Grayson step out briefly toward the hall. I thought he was checking the fire or something. Then Eleanor went upstairs, and, well, you know the rest." Mrs. Tate nodded. "I saw him too, near the staircase. He looked distracted, but it was only a moment before the scream." Miss Marple thanked them, her mind noting the consistency of their accounts. Leonard's presence near the stairs, just before the tragedy, was no coincidence, she was certain. She turned to Miss Reed, who sat alone by the fire, her face etched with grief. "Miss Reed," Miss Marple began, her voice soft, "Eleanor was dear to you. Did she ever speak of troubles at home?" The old woman's eyes filled with tears. She was my sister's child, my pride. Lately, she was afraid, said Leonard was different, cruel. She wouldn't say more, but I knew her heart was heavy. Her voice broke, and she clutched her locket, a silver oval with Eleanor's miniature. Inside, Miss Marple patted her hand, her resolve hardening. The coroner's verdict might satisfy the village, but she saw beyond the surface, to a truth that demanded exposure. Leonard's debts, Eleanor's fears, the scuff mark, the sedative all pointed to a crime disguised as chance. She would stay, she decided, and unravel the threads of this Christmas tragedy. For Eleanor's sake and for justice, as the snow fell outside. Miss Marple returned to her room, her knitting resumed, and her mind worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle. That holly house concealed. Chapter 3. The guests under scrutiny, the afternoon sun struggled through the heavy clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a wan light across Holly House. The snow, which had fallen steadily through the night, now lay in thick drifts, muffling the village and lending an air of isolation to the grand old residence. Inside, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. The festive trappings of Christmas Eve, glittering baubles, the wilting holly, the half-eaten platters of mince pies remained untouched, as if time had paused in deference to the tragedy. The guests, still reeling from Eleanor Gray's death, moved through the house with the cautious tread of those who sense a shadow lingering. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, a cosy space overlooking the frost-laced garden. Her knitting, a delicate shawl of pale lavender wool, progressed steadily in her lap, the click of her needles a soft metronome against the silence. Her blue eyes, bright and unyielding behind her spectacles, missed nothing. She had spent the morning reflecting on her conversations with Betsy and Mrs. Wentworth, piecing together the fragments of Eleanor's life and Leonard's motives. The coroner's verdict of accidental death, delivered with such brisk finality, sat ill with her. She knew, from long experience in St. Mary Mead, that truth often hid behind the facade of the obvious, and she was determined to uncover it. The remaining guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, Mr. and Mrs. Percival Tate, and Miss Lavinia Reedhart gathered for tea in the drawing-room, an event orchestrated by Miss Marple through a gentle suggestion to the housekeeper. Mrs. Dobbs' tea, she knew, was a great loosener of tongues, and she intended to use the occasion to probe deeper into the dynamics of the Christmas Eve gathering. Leonard Grayson, notably absent, had retreated to his study, citing the need to arrange Eleanor's funeral. His absence, Miss Marple noted, was convenient, allowing her to observe the others without his watchful presence. She entered the drawing-room with her characteristic unobtrusiveness, her black lace shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting bag tucked under one arm. The room was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, but the mood was strained. Mrs. Wentworth, resplendent in a violet gown that clashed with the sombre occasion, held court near the tea-tray, her voice carrying as she recounted the village's latest gossip. Dr. Finch sat apart, his thin frame hunched over a cup, his nervous tic more pronounced than ever. The Tates, seated close together on a velvet settee, exchanged anxious glances, their youth and inexperience stark against the gravity of the moment. Miss Reed, frail and silent, clutched a laced handkerchief, her eyes fixed on a portrait of Eleanor above the mantel. Miss Marple settled into a chair near the window, her smile benign but her mind alert. Such a comfort, tea, in times of sorrow, she remarked, accepting a cup from Mrs. Dobbs. It brings us together, does it not? I find myself thinking of poor Eleanor, How she loved these gatherings. Her words, gentle as they were, stirred the room. Mrs. Wentworth seized the opportunity, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of discourse. Oh, Eleanor was the soul of this house, always so lively, so generous. But I must say, Miss Marple sensed a tension in her these past weeks. She confided in me, you know, just before the party, said Leonard was pressing her terribly about some financial matter. I told her, my dear, you must stand firm. But she looked so worried. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze soft but probing. Worried, you say? Did she mention what troubled her? Mrs. Wentworth leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though loud enough for all to hear. Money, of course. Leonard's business, some dreary shipping venture, has been failing for years. Eleanor told me he'd been after her to release funds from her trust, but she refused. She said he'd grown quite unpleasant about it. I saw it myself last night, the way he watched her, like a man counting coins rather than admiring his wife. The Tates shifted uncomfortably, and Mrs. Tate, a delicate blonde with wide eyes, spoke up hesitantly. We didn't know them well, Miss Marple, but we noticed Mr. Grayson seemed distant. During charades, he barely joined in, just stood by the fire, staring at Mrs. Grayson. It was odd, wasn't it, Percy? Mr. Tate nodded, his lanky frame tensing. Yes, and I saw him step out to the hall just before she went upstairs. I thought he was checking the door or something, but he was near the staircase when we heard the scream. It all happened so fast. Miss Marple's expression remained placid, but her mind catalogued the detail. Leonard's proximity to the stairs, confirmed now by multiple witnesses, was a thread she could not ignore. How distressing it must have been for you both, she said kindly. And you, Dr. Finch. You were so quick to attend to poor Eleanor. Did you notice anything unusual in her demeanor earlier in the evening? Dr. Finch started, his cup clattering against its saucer. His tic twitched violently, and he dabbed at his brow with a handkerchief. Unusual? No, she was herself, full of life, as Mrs. Wentworth said. Perhaps a bit flushed from the wine, but nothing out of the ordinary. I only wish I could have done more when she fell. His agitation was palpable, and Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to the door, as if expecting interruption. You did all you could, I'm sure, she said soothingly. But as a doctor, you must have observed her closely. Was she quite steady, do you think, before she ascended the stairs? Dr. Finch hesitated, his fingers twisting the handkerchief. Steady enough, I suppose. She'd been dancing, laughing, but I did prescribe her a sedative some weeks ago, for nerves. It was mild, quite mild. I doubt it played a role, but... He trailed off, his face pallid. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. The soft click-click, a counterpoint to the tension. A sedative, she thought, could explain much dizziness, a faltering step, especially if tampered with. But she pressed no further, sensing Dr. Finch's discomfort bordered on panic. Instead, she turned to Miss Reed, who had remained silent, her frail form almost lost in the armchair. Miss Reed, Miss Marple said gently, you were so close to Eleanor. Did she share any concerns with you, perhaps about her health, or her home? Miss Reed's rheumy eyes lifted, glistening with unshed tears. Her voice, when she spoke, was a tremulous whisper. Eleanor was my joy, my sister's child. She was troubled, yes, but she hid it well. She spoke of Leonard's temper, how he'd changed. Last night, I saw her flinch when he touched her arm. It broke my heart, but I said nothing. Oh, I should have spoken. Her words ended in a sob, and Mrs. Wentworth hurried to her side, offering a handkerchief and a murmured platitude. Miss Marple, however, remained focused, her mind sifting through the revelations. Eleanor's fear, Leonard's temper, the sedative, and his presence near the stairs formed a pattern, but it was incomplete. She needed more, something tangible to anchor her suspicions. As tea concluded, the guests dispersed, their nerves frayed. By the conversation, Miss Marple lingered, ostensibly to help Mrs. Dobbs clear the cups. But her true purpose was to speak with the housekeeper. Mrs. Dobbs, a stout woman with a nonsense air, was polishing the silver teapot when Miss Marple approached. "A sad day for Holly House, Mrs. Dobbs," Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic. "You must have known Mrs. Grayson well, managing her household as you do." Mrs. Dobbs nodded, her hands slowing. "Aye, miss, she was a kind mistress. Always. A smile, even when things were strained. These past months, though she was different, quiet, like she carried a weight. Mr. Grayson, he's not an easy man. I heard them arguing, more than once, about money and such." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained mild. "Arguing, you say? Did you overhear anything specific?" Mrs. Dobbs glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Just bits, miss. Mrs. Grayson, she was firm, said her money was hers to manage, not his. He didn't like that, not one bit. I saw him slam his fist on the table once, when he thought no one was about. And last night he was in a queer mood." Pacing the hall before the party started, Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. The picture of Leonard's desperation was growing clearer, but she needed evidence beyond hearsay. Excusing herself, she made her way to the library, where she had noticed a desk cluttered with papers during her earlier visit. Leonard was still absent, and the house was quiet, the guests occupied with their own thoughts, the library lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture, smelled of wax and old paper. Miss Marple approached the desk, her movements deliberate but cautious. She riffled through the papers, her gloved fingers careful to leave no trace. Bills, letters, and receipts painted a grim picture. Leonard's shipping business was hemorrhaging. Money, with creditors demanding payment. Tucked beneath a ledger, she found a letter from Eleanor's solicitor, dated a week prior, mentioning a potential revision to her will. The letter was brief, but its implications were profound. Lana had considered altering her estate, possibly to exclude Leonard. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The letter, if Leonard had seen it, would have been a catalyst, a spur to action. She replaced the papers exactly as she found them and slipped out, her heart quickening. The library had confirmed her suspicions, but it also raised a question. How had Leonard engineered the fall? The staircase, the sedative, the dim light all suggested premeditation. But the mechanics eluded her. She decided to revisit the staircase, hoping for a clue overlooked in the morning's haste. The hall was empty, the sconces now brightly lit, casting long shadows across the oak treads. She ascended slowly, her hand trailing along the banister, smooth and unyielding. At the top, the small table with its vase of holly stood undisturbed, but she knelt to examine the carpet once more. The scuff mark, faint but distinct, was joined by another, smaller marker, crescent-shaped indentation, as if a heel had caught briefly. It was subtle, easily missed by the coroner's cursory inspection, but to Miss Marple it whispered of struggle, of resistance. She stood, her mind conjuring the scene. Eleanor, perhaps unsteady from a tampered sedative, reaching the top of the stairs, Leonard, following silently, seizing his moment. A push, a stumble, a scream. The sequence was plausible, but proof remained elusive. She needed to understand the sedative's role, and that meant pressing Dr. Finch further. She found him in the conservatory, where he was pretending to read a medical journal, his hands trembling. "Dr. Finch," she said, settling beside him, "I've been thinking about Eleanor's health. You mentioned a sedative, but was there anything else she took? Something that might have caused dizziness, perhaps?" His tic flared, and he avoided her gaze. "Nothing else, Miss Marple. The sedative was standard, a low dose. I checked her myself last week. She was fit, no heart trouble, no fainting spells. The fall was an accident, as the coroner said." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were unrelenting. "Of course, but accidents can be so puzzling. I recall a case in my village, a young woman who fell from a balcony. Everyone assumed she'd been drinking, but it turned out her husband had slipped something into her tea. Such a small thing, but it changed everything." Dr. Finch's face drained of colour, and he rose abruptly. "I must check on Miss Reed. She's been unwell." He fled the room, leaving Miss Marple to ponder his reaction. His fear, she suspected, stemmed from more than professional embarrassment. Had Leonard coerced him, perhaps, to supply a stronger dose? The possibility was chilling, but it fit the pattern. As evening fell, Miss Marple joined the guests for a subdued dinner, Leonard reappearing to play the grieving host. His manners were impeccable, but his eyes, when they met Miss Marple's, held a wariness that confirmed her resolve. She ate sparingly, her thoughts occupied with the next step. The guests, she realized, had provided pieces of the puzzle, but the key lay with Leonard and, with the secrets Hollyhouse still held. Retiring to her room, she sat by the window, her knitting idle for once. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence, but her mind was far from quiet. Eleanor's fear, Leonard's debts, the scuff marks, the sedative, the letter all pointed to a calculated act, disguised as chance. She would watch, she decided, and wait. The truth, like the snow, would settle in time, revealing what lay beneath. Chapter 4. The scene of the crime. The second day at Holly House dawned with a brittle clarity, the snow having ceased to leave a crystalline sheen across St. Mary Mead. The village stirred slowly, its inhabitants whispering of the tragedy that had marred the Christmas season. Within the grand residence, the air was heavy with unspoken questions. The festive decorations, now a cruel reminder of the joy so abruptly extinguished. Miss Jane Marple, rising early, stood at her guest-room window, her sharp eyes tracing the frost patterns on the glass as her mind sifted through the clues. Gathered thus far, Leonard Grayson's financial desperation, Eleanor's fears, the suspicious scuff marks on the staircase, and Dr. Finch's nervous reticence about the sedative. The coroner's verdict of accidental death, delivered with such bureaucratic haste, was a flimsy curtain over a darker truth, and Miss Marple was determined to draw it aside. She dressed with her usual care, choosing a grey wool dress and her black-laced shawl, her appearance as unassuming as ever. Her knitting bag, containing a half-finished shawl and a small notebook for jotting observations, was tucked under her arm as she descended to the morning room for breakfast. The household was subdued. Leonard Grayson was absent, reportedly meeting with the undertaker, while the remaining guests, Dr. Finch, Mrs. Wentworth, the Tates, and Miss Redate, in near silence, their faces drawn with the strain of the past 36 hours. Miss Marple, taking a seat near the window, noted their discomfort. her mild smile masking the intensity of her scrutiny. After breakfast, she resolved to re-examine the staircase, the heart of the mystery. The hall, with its high ceiling and polished oak paneling, was quiet, the servants moving softly to avoid disturbing the mourners. The grand staircase loomed before her, its treads wide and shallow, designed more for grandeur than peril. The Persian carpet, richly patterned in crimson and gold, was firmly tacked, its edges pristine. The oak banister, smooth from years of use, gleamed under the morning light streaming through a tall window. At the top, a small mahogany table held a vase of holly, its berries still vibrant, untouched by the chaos of Christmas Eve. Miss Marple ascended slowly, her hand gliding along the banister, testing its sturdiness. She paused at each step, her eyes scanning for anomalies. The scuff mark she had noted previously, faint but distinct, was still visible on the carpet near the top step, a subtle abrasion that suggested a struggle or a sudden movement. Beside it, the crescent-shaped indentation, possibly from a heel, its outline sharper in the daylight. She knelt, her fingers brushing the carpet, noting its texture and resilience. The marks were not the result of ordinary wear. They spoke of a moment of violence, however brief. She turned her attention to the sconce on the wall, the brass fixture Betsy had mentioned Leonard tampering with before Eleanor's fall. The bulb was standard, its glass unmarred, but the switch bore a faint smudge, as if wiped hastily. Miss Marple flicked it on and off, observing the light's intensity. It was adequate now, but she recalled the dim glow of Christmas Eve, a shadow-filled ambience that could have masked a deliberate act. She made a mental note to ask Betsy if the bulb had been replaced or adjusted since the tragedy. At the top of the stairs, she examined the mahogany table more closely. The vase of holly was heavy, its base wide and stable, unlikely to have been knocked over in a fall. Yet she noticed a faint scratch on the table's edge, barely visible, as if something had grazed it, a shoe, perhaps, or a flailing hand. The carpet beneath the table was undisturbed, but she crouched again, her eyes catching a single holly leaf, its glossy surface tucked beneath the table's leg. It was out of place, its stem bent, as if trodden upon. Miss Marple slipped it into her handkerchief, her mind racing. A leaf, dislodged in a struggle, could be a silent witness to Eleanor's final moments. She descended, pausing at the base of the stairs where Eleanor's body had lain. The carpet here was pristine, no blood or marks to indicate the fall's impact, consistent with Dr. Finch's report of a broken neck. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the bruise she had glimpsed on Eleanor's wrist, a detail overlooked in the coroner's rush to judgment. Had it been caused by a grip, a restraint, before the fatal push? The possibility gnawed at her, urging her to seek further evidence. Her inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Constable Reed, who entered the hall with a purposeful stride, his young face set in a frown. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his cap, "I heard you were staying on. No need to trouble yourself, ma'am. The coroner's got this in hand accident, plain as day." Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her voice gentle. "Of course, Constable, you're quite right to trust Mr. Caldwell's judgment. But an old woman like me, with too much time on her hands, can't help but wonder. The staircase is so grand, so safe. It's curious, don't you think, that Mrs. Grayson should fall so fatally?" Constable Reed shifted, his confidence wavering. "Well, ma'am, she'd had a bit to drink, and the light was low. These things happen, especially at Christmas, with all the merriment." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. But I recall a case in my village. Years ago a young man fell from a hayloft, and everyone said it was the cider. Turned out his brother had given him a shove over a quarrel about land. Small things, constable, can hide great wrongs. The constable flushed, his notebook twitching in his hand. No evidence of that here, Miss Marple. The inquest's tomorrow, and it'll settle things. Best leave it to us. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of acquiescence, but her resolve was unshaken. As Constable Reed departed, she made her way to the morning room, where she found Mrs. Dobbs overseeing the removal of the breakfast dishes. The housekeeper, with her practical demeanour, was a font of household knowledge, and Miss Marple approached her with a request. "Mrs. Dobbs," she said, "I wonder if you might help me with a small matter. I'm writing a note to my friend about poor Eleanor, and I'd like to describe the house accurately. Could you tell me about the staircase, its maintenance, perhaps, or any recent changes?" Mrs. Dobbs, flattered by the interest, set down her tray. "The staircase, Miss. It's the pride of Holly House. Been here since the Graysons built the place a century ago. We keep its spotless carpets cleaned weekly, banister polished every other day. No repairs needed, not in my time. The sconces, though there. Old Mr. Grayson was complaining about just last week, said one was flickering. I told Betsy to check the bulbs, but I don't know if she did." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "Flickering, you say? And did Mr. Grayson attend to it himself, perhaps on Christmas Eve?" Mrs. Dobbs frowned, her memory straining. "Now you mention it, miss, I did see him by the sconce that night, before the guests arrived. Thought he was just fussing, as he does. He's particular about the house looking grand for company." "Thank you, Mrs. Dobbs," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "You've been most helpful." She excused herself, her mind buzzing. Leonard's attention to the sconce, confirmed now by 2 witnesses, suggested more than a host's fastidiousness. A dimmed light could obscure a crime, creating the perfect conditions for a staged accident. Her next task was to speak with Betsy, who she found in the scullery, scrubbing pots with a vigour born of nervous energy. The housemaid's round face brightened at Miss Marple's approach, though her eyes were wary. "Miss Marple, you're still here. It's a sad house now, ain't it?" "Very sad," Miss Marple agreed, settling onto a stool. "Betsy, you've been so kind to share your thoughts. I was wondering about the staircase lights. Mrs. Dobbs mentioned a flickering sconce, and you were to check the bulbs. Did you, by chance?" Betsy's hands stilled, her cheeks flushing. "I meant to, miss, but I got busy with the party preparations. Mr. Grayson, he checked it himself, I think. I saw him by the sconce, like I told you, just before Mrs. Grayson went upstairs. I didn't think much of it then, but it's queer, ain't it?" "Queer indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "And did you notice anything else that night? Perhaps around the staircase or the hall?" Betsy hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. "There was one thing, miss, but I don't know if it matters. When I was clearing the glasses after it happened, I found a button on the floor near the bottom of the stairs. Small, black, like from a man's coat. I put it in the lost and found box, thinking it was a guest's, but no one's claimed it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained placid. "A button, you say? How thoughtful of you to keep it. Might I see it, Betsy? It could help put my mind at ease about the evening." Betsy nodded, leading her to a small cupboard in the servants' hall where the lost and found box was kept. Inside, Among stray gloves and a broken brooch was a small black button, its surface scratched but intact. Miss Marple examined it closely, noting its size and the faint thread clinging to its shank. It was unremarkable, yet it could be significant, a trace of someone's presence at the scene. She thanked Betsy, slipping the button into her handkerchief alongside the holly leaf, her mind already tracing its possible origins. Returning to the hall, she considered her next move. The physical evidence scuff marks a holly leaf, a button, a smudged sconsoise mounting, but it was circumstantial, insufficient to challenge the coroner's verdict without a clearer link to Leonard. She needed to understand Eleanor's state of mind and health in the hours before her death, which meant revisiting Dr. Finch's account of the sedative. She found the doctor in the library, sorting through a stack of medical journals with a distracted air. His tic was pronounced, his hands trembling as he met her gaze. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice strained, "I hope you're finding some comfort here, despite everything." "As much as one can," she replied, settling into a chair. "Dr. Finch, I've been thinking about Eleanor's health. You mentioned a sedative for nerves, but I wonder if she complained of anything else, dizziness, perhaps, or unusual fatigue. Such symptoms can be so telling." Dr. Finch's face tightened, his fingers twisting a pen. "She did mention dizziness, once or twice, but I attributed it to stress. Her marriage, you know. It weighed on her. The sedative was mild, I assure you, incapable of causing a fall. I checked her vitals last week. She was in excellent health, no underlying conditions." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her gaze steady. "And the sedative, was it kept in her room, where anyone might have access? Or did you dispense it directly?" He paled, his tic flaring. "I gave her a small bottle to take as needed. It was in her boudoir, I believe. But I don't see how it matters." The coroner said. "Yes, the coroner," Miss Marple interrupted gently. "But coroners can miss things, can't they? I recall a case in St. Mary Mead, a woman who died after taking what she thought was her usual medicine. Someone had tampered with it, you see. Such a small thing, but it changed everything." Dr. Finch rose abruptly, his journal falling to the floor. "I must attend to my rounds, Miss Marple, excuse me." He fled, leaving her to ponder his panic. The sedative, she suspected, was the key means to disorient Eleanor, ensuring her vulnerability on the stairs, but proving tampering would require access to the bottle, if it still existed. As the day waned, Miss Marple sat in her room, her knitting idle as she reviewed her findings. The staircase, with its subtle marks and displaced holly leaf, told a story of struggle. The button, possibly Leonard's, placed him at the scene. The sconce, deliberately dimmed, set the stage, and the sedative, if tampered with, provided the means. Yet the puzzle was incomplete. She needed to connect these clues to Leonard's motive, Eleanor's fortune, and the threat of a revised will. She resolved to search Eleanor's boudoir, where the sedative might still be. Under the guise of fetching a book, she slipped upstairs, her steps silent on the carpet. The boudoir, elegantly appointed in shades of rose and cream, was untouched, a shrine to its late occupant. Miss Marple moved swiftly, checking the dressing table and bedside cabinet. In a small drawer, she found a glass vial, its label reading sedative, Dr. Finch. It was nearly empty, but a faint residue remained. She wrapped it carefully in her handkerchief, knowing it could hold the proof she sought. As she left the room, she heard Leonard's voice downstairs, sharp and impatient, speaking to the solicitor by telephone. "The funds must be released soon," he said. "I can't wait forever." The desperation in his tone confirmed her suspicions, but it also heightened her caution. Leonard was a man cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. Returning to her room, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, the vial button and holly leaf hidden in her bag. The scene of the crime had yielded its secrets, but the path to justice was narrow and fraught. She would proceed with care, watching Leonard, probing Dr. Finch, and piecing together the truth that Holly House concealed. Chapter 5. A Widow's Tale. The third morning at Holly House broke with a tentative sun, its rays piercing the heavy clouds to glint off the snow-draped lawns of St. Mary Mead. The village, still hushed by the tragedy of Eleanor Grayson's death, seemed to hold its breath as if awaiting the next revelation. Within the grand residence, the air was thick with unspoken suspicions. The festive remnants of Christmas Eve, now gathering dust, a silent reproach to the sorrow that had overtaken the household. Miss Jane Marple, rising with the dawn, sat at her guest-room window, her knitting idle as she reviewed her findings. The scuff marks and holly leaf from the staircase, the black button, the smudged sconce, and the vial of sedative from Eleanor's boudoir. Each clue pointed to a deliberate act, with Leonard Grayson at its heart, driven by financial ruin and the threat of a revised will. Yet the puzzle remained incomplete, requiring further insight into Eleanor's final days to solidify the case. Against her husband, Miss Marple, dressed in a sombre navy frock, her black lace shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting bag a constant companion, she descended to the dining room, where breakfast was a subdued affair. Leonard Grayson, pale and withdrawn, excused himself early, muttering about correspondence with the solicitor. The remaining guest, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, Mr. and Mrs. Percival Tate, and Miss Lavinia Redate, sparingly, their conversation stilted. Miss Marple, taking a seat near the window, observed their strained interactions, her mild demeanour masking the sharpness of her scrutiny. She noted Dr. Finch's persistent tick, Mrs. Wentworth's eager glances, and Miss Reed's quiet grief, each a thread in the tapestry of suspicion she was weaving. Her plan for the day was clear: to deepen her understanding of Eleanor's state of mind through Mrs. Wentworth, whose penchant for gossip made her a valuable, if unwitting, ally. Mrs. Wentworth had already hinted at Eleanor's fears and Leonard's financial pressures, but Miss Marple sensed there was more to uncover that might illuminate the events leading to the fatal fall. She approached the widow after breakfast, suggesting a walk to the village, ostensibly to clear their minds. Mrs. Wentworth, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, I find a brisk walk so restorative, don't you? And the village is so charming. Even in this sad time, would you join me? I'd value your company. Mrs. Wentworth, flattered by the invitation, readily agreed, her mauve cloak swirling as she prepared. Oh, Miss Marple, you're quite right. Fresh air will do us good, and I confess I'm eager to escape this gloomy house for a bit. They set out, the snow crunching under their boots, the village unfolding before them in a picturesque tableau of thatched cottages and frosted hedgerows. The vicarage, a modest stone building, offered a warm respite, and Miss Marple steered them there. Knowing the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, was a friend of Eleanor's, and might provide a neutral setting for confidences, Mrs. Clement welcomed them with tea and scones, her kindly face creasing with sympathy as she spoke of Eleanor's loss. Over tea, Miss Marple guided the conversation with her usual finesse, her questions cloaked in polite curiosity. Mrs. Wentworth, you knew Eleanor so well, she began, stirring her tea. I've been thinking of her warmth, her spirit. But you mentioned she seemed troubled lately. Did she share what weighed on her heart?" Mrs. Wentworth, relishing the opportunity to share, leaned forward, her voice low but eager. "Oh, Miss Marple, she was dreadfully troubled, though she tried to hide it. We had tea at my cottage just 10 days ago, and she poured out her heart. Leonard, you see, was in a terrible state. His business, that wretched shipping venture, was on the brink of collapse. He'd been hounding her to release funds from her trust, but she wouldn't budge. She said he'd grown cruel, snapping at her, locking himself in his study for hours. She even found letters from creditors, hidden in his desk debts of thousands." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her expression one of gentle concern. "Thousands, you say? How distressing for her. Did she mention any plans to address this, perhaps with her solicitor?" Mrs. Wentworth's eyes gleamed with the thrill of revelation. "She did, indeed. She told me she was considering changing her will. Her fortune, you know, came from her father, and she controlled it entirely. Leonard would get nothing unless she died, and even then only if the will favoured him. She said she'd spoken to Mr. Hargreaves, her solicitor, about redirecting her. Estate perhaps, to a cousin or a charity. She was quite firm about it, said she wouldn't let Leonard ruin her legacy. Oh, Miss Marple, I urged her to be careful, but she laughed it off, saying Leonard would never dare cross her." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained placid. The mention of a cousin caught her off guard, and she recalled a distant connection to Eleanor through her mother's side. Could she herself be the cousin in question? The thought was startling, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the implications. A revised will, if Leonard knew of it, would have been a mortal threat, a motive for murder cloaked as an accident. "How brave of her," she murmured. "Did she say when she planned to meet Mr. Hargreaves?" Mrs. Wentworth sipped her tea, her brow furrowing. "She was to see him after Christmas, I believe. She'd written to him, setting a date, but she was nervous." Miss Marple kept looking over her shoulder, as if she feared being overheard. "I saw it myself at the party, the way she flinched when Leonard touched her arm. It wasn't like her, not at all." Mrs. Clement, who had been listening quietly, added, "Eleanor was here at the vicarage a week ago, helping with the carolers. Rehearsal, she seemed distracted, kept glancing at the door. I asked if all was well, and she said only that marriage could be a trial. I didn't press, but I wish I had." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the details. Eleanor's fear, her resolve to protect her fortune, and her plans to alter her will formed a clear motive for Leonard. The bruise on Eleanor's wrist, glimpsed on Christmas Eve, now took on a sinister cast, perhaps the result of a confrontation, a moment of violence before the fatal fall. She thanked Mrs. Clement and steered Mrs. Wentworth back to the topic of the party, probing for any overlooked details. "Christmas Eve was so festive," Miss Marple said, "but I confess, my memory is hazy. Where was everyone when Eleanor went upstairs? I recall the carolers, the singing." Mrs. Wentworth seized the bait, her memory sharp despite her dramatic flair. "We were all in the drawing room, singing Silent Night. Eleanor was laughing, a bit flushed from the wine, but not unsteady, I'd swear. Leonard was by the fireplace at first, but I saw him slip out to the hall just before Eleanor went up. I thought he was fetching more coal, but he was near the staircase when the scream came. Dr. Finch was by the punch bowl, fussing with his glass, and the Tates were at the window, arm in arm. Miss Reed was in her chair, half dozing, poor thing." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly. Leonard's movements, consistently placed near the staircase, were no coincidence. She pressed further, her tone casual. And Eleanor herself, did she seem herself? Or was there anything unusual in her manner? Mrs. Wentworth frowned, her fingers tapping the teacup. She was merry, but there was a moment, just before she left, when she looked dazed, almost. I thought it was the wine, but her eyes were odd, like she was trying to focus. She shook it off, laughed, and went up for her shawl. I didn't think much of it then, but now. Oh, Miss Marple, it's too dreadful. Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind racing. The dazed look, coupled with Dr. Finch's sedative, suggested tampering a stronger dose. Perhaps, to ensure Eleanor's disorientation, the vial in her knitting bag, with its faint residue, might hold the proof, but she needed to confirm its contents. She thanked Mrs. Wentworth and Mrs. Clement, steering the conversation to lighter matters before they returned to Holly House. Back at the residence, Miss Marple found the house quiet, the guests dispersed to their rooms or the village. Leonard was in his study, his voice audible through the door as he spoke sharply to someone on the telephone. The funds must be accessible immediately, he snapped. I've waited long enough. The desperation in his tone confirmed her suspicions, but it also heightened her caution. A man so driven was unpredictable, and she must tread carefully. She sought out Betsy, hoping to learn more about the household's routines, particularly Eleanor's habits with the sedative. The housemaid was in the laundry, folding linens with a distracted air. Betsy, Miss Marple said, her smile warm, you've been so helpful. I was wondering about Mrs. Grayson's boudoir. Did she keep her medicines there, or did someone fetch them for her? Betsy brightened, eager to assist. She kept M in her dressing table, Miss in a little drawer. I saw the bottle Dr. Finch gave Hersmall with a label. She took it. Herself, usually at night, but I heard Mr. Grayson once, telling her to take it, saying she needed rest. I thought it was kind, but, well, it's odd now, ain't it? Miss Marple's heart quickened. Leonard's involvement with the sedative was a critical link, suggesting he had access and opportunity to tamper. Very odd, she agreed. And did you ever see him in her boudoir? Perhaps handling her things? Betsy nodded, her eyes wide. Once or twice, miss, when he thought no one was about. I saw him at her dressing table, looking through her drawer. I didn't say nothing, didn't seem my place, but it stuck with me. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. The vial, the button, the holly leaf, and now Leonard's suspicious behavior in Eleanor's boudoir formed a damning pattern, but she needed to connect it to the physical evidence. She decided to examine Leonard's study, where the financial papers and solicitor's letter had been found, hoping for further clues. Under the guise of borrowing a book, she slipped into the study while Leonard was out, the room dim and smelling of leather and tobacco. The desk was cluttered, but she moved swiftly, her gloved fingers sifting through papers. She found a crumpled note in Eleanor's handwriting, tucked beneath a ledger. Must see Hargreaves. L cannot be trusted. The note was undated, but its urgency was clear. Nearby, a tailor's receipt for a black coat, dated a month prior. Caught her eye the coat's buttons, described as small, ebony, 4-hole. It matched the button in her handkerchief, a potential link to Leonard's presence at the scene. She replaced the papers and left, her heart pounding. The note confirmed Eleanor's intent to change her will, and the button tied Leonard to the staircase. But the sedative remained the linchpin. She needed to confront Dr. Finch, whose fear suggested complicity, However unwilling, she found him. In the conservatory, his face ashen as he pretended to water a fern. "Dr. Finch," she said, settling beside him, "I've been thinking about Eleanor's sedative. You said it was mild, but could someone have altered it? A stronger dose? Perhaps to cause dizziness." His tic flared, his hands trembling. "Altered? No, impossible. I dispensed it myself, a standard dose. I don't know what you're suggesting, Miss Marple, but I had no part in anything untoward." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice gentle but firm. "Of course, doctor, but I recall a case in my village, a man who died after his medicine was tampered with. The doctor was blameless, but he'd been pressured to supply more than he should. Such things happen under duress." Dr. Finch's face crumpled, and he sank onto a bench. I may have given her a slightly stronger bottle at Mr. Grayson's request. He said she was sleepless, needed help. I didn't think, oh God, what have I done?" Miss Marple patted his hand, her mind racing. The admission was a breakthrough, but she needed the vial analyzed to confirm tampering. For now, she had enough to tighten the net around Leonard. As evening fell, she sat in her room, her knitting resumed. The clues note, button, leaf, vial, and Dr. Finch's confession aligned like stars in a constellation of guilt. Leonard's motive, means, and opportunity were clear, but she must proceed with care, for the truth was a fragile thing, easily crushed by a desperate man. Chapter 6. The doctor's discomfort the fourth day at Holly House unfolded under a sky heavy with the promise of more snow. The village of St. Mary Mead cloaked in a quiet that seemed to mirror the unease within the grand residence. The festive spirit of Christmas had long since faded, the decorations now a poignant reminder of the tragedy that had struck on Christmas Eve. Miss Jane Marple, ever alert behind her mild exterior, sat in her guest room, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting bag at her side. The clues she had gathered, the scuff marks and holly leaf from the staircase, the black button, the smudged sconce, the sedative vial, Eleanor's note, and Dr. Finch's reluctant admission formed a compelling case against Leonard Grayson. Yet the puzzle was not complete. The sedative's role remained a critical piece, and Dr. Finch's evident fear suggested a deeper involvement, perhaps coerced, that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. She dressed in a soft grey frock, her black laced shawl adding a touch of sombre elegance, and descended to the morning room, where breakfast was a tense affair. Leonard Grayson, his face drawn, was absent, reportedly consulting with the undertaker about Eleanor's funeral arrangements. The remaining guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, Mr. and Mrs. Percival Tate, and Miss Lavinia repicked at their food, their eyes darting nervously, as if each sensed the weight of unspoken truths. Miss Marple, taking a seat by the window, sipped her tea, her gaze gentle but piercing, noting the way Dr. Finch's hands trembled, his tic more pronounced than ever. Her strategy for the day was clear: to press Dr. Finch further, probing the circumstances of the sedative's prescription and any pressure Leonard might have exerted. His confession, the previous day that he had supplied a stronger dose at Leonard's urging, had been a breakthrough, but his panic suggested he knew more, perhaps something that could tie Leonard directly to the tampering. She also planned to verify the button's origin, suspecting it matched Leonard's coat, and to explore Eleanor's boudoir for any additional evidence of her intentions regarding her will after breakfast. Miss Marple lingered in the morning room, ostensibly to read the morning paper, but her true aim was to observe Dr. Finch, who remained at the table, staring into his untouched coffee. His thin frame seemed to shrink under the weight of his thoughts, his fingers twisting a napkin into knots. She approached him with her characteristic tact, her voice soft and reassuring. "Dr. Finch," she said, settling into a chair beside him, "you look quite unwell this morning. I do hope you're managing under the strain of these sad events. It must be difficult, as a physician, to lose a patient so suddenly." "Doctor," Finch started, his tic flaring as he met her gaze. "Miss Marple, yes, it's been a shock. Eleanor was so vibrant, so healthy. I keep thinking I should have seen something, done something." His voice cracked, and he looked away, his hands clenching the napkin. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing counterpoint to his agitation. "You did all you could, I'm sure," she said. "But I've been wondering about that sedative you prescribed. You mentioned yesterday that Mr. Grayson requested a stronger dose. Was that unusual for a husband to be so involved in his wife's medication?" Dr. Finch's face paled, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting Leonard to appear. It wasn't typical, no. He came to my surgery a week ago, said Eleanor was sleepless, anxious. He insisted she needed something stronger, said the mild dose wasn't working. I trusted his word, Miss Marple. He's her husband, after all. I gave him a new bottle with a higher potency, but I warned him it must be taken sparingly. Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her tone gentle but probing. "And did you give the bottle to Eleanor directly, or to Mr. Grayson?" He hesitated, his tic twitching violently. "To him," he said. He'd ensure she took it properly. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now. Oh God, I should have questioned him. His voice rose, then fell to a whisper, his hands trembling so fiercely that the napkin tore. Miss Marple patted his arm, her expression one of sympathy, though her mind raced. Leonard's direct involvement with the sedative was a critical link, suggesting he had both opportunity and intent to tamper. "You couldn't have known," she said soothingly. "But tell me, Dr. Finch, was the bottle labelled clearly? Could someone have mistaken it for another, or perhaps altered its contents?" Dr. Finch's eyes widened, his breath catching. "Altered? No, that's impossible. The bottle was sealed, labelled with my own hand. Sedative, stronger dose, 1 drop nightly. I keep my surgery locked, Miss Marple, and I'm careful with prescriptions. But Leonard was so insistent, so forceful, he frightened me, if I'm honest. He's not a man to cross." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly. "Frightened you, you say? Did he threaten you, perhaps, to ensure your compliance?" Dr. Finch shook his head, but his denial lacked conviction. "Not a threat, exactly, but he implied things. Said my practice depends on the goodwill of families like his, that a word from him could ruin me. I've debts, Miss Marple, from my training. I couldn't afford to lose his patronage, so I complied, God help me." Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. Leonard's coercion of Dr. Finch was a damning piece of the puzzle, suggesting a calculated plan to secure a means of disorienting Eleanor. She pressed further, her voice gentle but relentless. "And after you gave him the bottle, did you see Eleanor take it? Or did Mr. Grayson mention how she responded?" Dr. Finch's face crumpled, his voice barely audible. "I saw her the day before the party, at a village tea. She seemed tired, said she'd taken the sedative the previous night and felt foggy. I thought it was just the dose adjusting, but now I wonder, what if he gave her too much? What if I've caused her death?" He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Miss Marple's expression softened, but her mind was ablaze. The foggy feeling Eleanor described aligned with Mrs. Wentworth's observation of her dazed look on Christmas Eve, a symptom of an overdose, perhaps deliberately administered. She comforted Dr. Finch, urging him to rest, but resolved to secure the vial for analysis, if possible. Its residue could confirm tampering, sealing Leonard's guilt. Excusing herself, she made her way to the servants' hall, seeking Betsy to inquire about Leonard's coat, hoping to match the black button. The housemaid was polishing silver, her face brightening at Miss Marple's approach. "Miss Marple, you're a sight for sore eyes in this gloomy house," she said, setting down a candlestick. "Betsy, you're too kind," Miss Marple replied, her smile warm. "I was wondering about Mr. Grayson's wardrobe. That button you found, small, black, from a man's coat, made me think of him. Does he have a black coat? Perhaps one he wore on Christmas Eve?" Betsy nodded eagerly. "Oh, he's got a fine black overcoat, tailored special. Wore it that night, I'm sure, 'cause I saw him hang it in the hall when the guests arrived. It's got small black buttons, just like the one I found. I can show you, if you like. It's in the cloakroom." Miss Marple followed her to the cloakroom, a narrow space off the entrance hall, where coats and scarves hung in neat rows. Betsy pointed to a black wool overcoat, its fabric heavy and well cut. Miss Marple examined it, noting a missing button. On the right cuff, the thread frayed in a manner matching the button in her handkerchief. "How observant you are, Betsy," she said, her heart racing. "This could be important. Might you keep it here, undisturbed, for now?" Betsy agreed, her eyes wide with curiosity, and Miss Marple thanked her, slipping back to the hall. The button, now linked to Leonard's coat, placed him at the scene of Eleanor's fall, a tangible clue to bolster her case. Yet the sedative remained the linchpin, and she needed to ensure the vial's safety while seeking a way to analyze its contents. Her next move was to revisit Eleanor's boudoir, hoping to find any overlooked evidence of her plans to revise her will. Under the pretense of fetching a shawl for Miss Reed, she slipped upstairs, her steps silent on the thick carpet. The boudoir, with its rose and cream decor, was a poignant reminder of Eleanor's vibrancy, now stilled. Miss Marple moved to the dressing table, checking the drawers where she had found the vial. A small leather diary caught her eye, tucked beneath a lace doily. She opened it, her gloved fingers careful, and found entries in Eleanor's elegant hand. The final entry, dated 2 days before Christmas, was brief but telling. "L's temper worsens. Found more debts, his lies unravel. Must see Hargreaves after the holiday. I fear what he might do if he knows." The words, stark and urgent, confirmed Eleanor's intent to alter her will and her growing fear of Leonard. Miss Marple slipped the diary into her knitting bag, knowing it could prove motive, though it would need corroboration, as she left the boudoir. She heard Leonard's voice downstairs, sharp and commanding, addressing Mrs. Dobbs about the funeral. "Ensure the guests. Leave soon," he said. "I need privacy to settle matters." The urgency in his tone suggested a man eager to erase scrutiny, and Miss Marple resolved to act swiftly. She sought out Mrs. Wentworth, hoping to confirm Eleanor's plans with the solicitor. The widow was in the drawing-room, flipping through a magazine with a distracted air. "Mrs. Wentworth," Miss Marple said, settling beside her, "you mentioned Eleanor's intention to change her will. Did she ever show you a letter or document, perhaps to Mr. Hargreaves?" Mrs. Wentworth's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Not a document, Miss Marple, but she showed me a draft, written in her own hand. It was at my cottage, during that tea I told you about. She'd written to Hargreaves, asking for an appointment to revise her will, leaving most of her fortune to a cousin. My dear, I believe it was you. She said you were kind, sensible, and wouldn't squander it. She was. So determined, but so afraid Leonard would find out. Miss Marple's heart skipped, though her expression remained composed. The revelation that she was the intended beneficiary was unexpected, but it strengthened Leonard's motive, fortune slipping from his grasp. How kind of her, she murmured. Did she keep this draft, do you know? Mrs. Wentworth shook her head. She took it with her, said she'd send it to Hargreaves after Christmas. I haven't seen it since, but she was adamant about protecting her estate from Leonard's debts. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. The diary entry, the draft will, and Dr. Finch's confession painted a vivid picture. Leonard, facing ruin, had learned of Eleanor's plans and acted to secure her fortune through her death. The sedative, the button, and the staircase marks were the means. But she needed to confront Dr. Finch one final time to confirm the tampering. She found him in the garden, pacing near a frozen fountain, his coat pulled tight against the cold. Dr. Finch, she said, approaching with her usual calm, I must ask you one more thing about the sedative. The bottle you gave Mr. Grayson, was it truly sealed, or could he have added something, perhaps from your surgery? Dr. Finch's face drained of colour, his tick a frantic rhythm. Sealed, I swear, but I keep other compounds in my surgery, locked away. Leonard was there the day he asked for the dose. I left him alone for a moment, only a moment. If he took something I didn't know, Miss Marple, I swear I didn't. Miss Marple's gaze was unrelenting, though her voice was kind. I believe you, doctor, but the truth will out. If you know anything more, now is the time to speak. He collapsed onto a bench, his voice a whisper. I found a vial missing. After he left a strong sedative, dangerous in excess. I thought I'd misplaced it, but now, oh God, he must have taken it. His confession, wrung from fear, was the final piece Miss Marple needed. She returned to her room, her knitting resumed, the diary, vial, button, and holly leaf secure in her bag. Dr. Finch's discomfort had revealed Leonard's method, a stolen sedative added to Eleanor's dose, ensuring her disorientation on the stairs. The evidence was nearly complete, but she must tread carefully, for Leonard's desperation was a spark that could ignite danger. As the snow began to fall again, Miss Marple planned her next move, determined to bring justice to Holly House. Chapter 7. The Aunt's Secret. The fifth morning at Holly House dawned with a biting chill. The snow that had fallen overnight blanketing St. Mary Mead in a pristine silence. The village, still reeling from Eleanor Grayson's tragic death, seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the undercurrents of suspicion swirling within the grand residence. Inside, the festive trappings of Christmas Eve faded tinsel, wilting holly, and untouched platters stood as relics of a joy extinguished. The house now a stage for Miss Jane Marple's quiet but relentless pursuit of truth. Her collection of clues, the scuff marks and holly leaf from the staircase, the black button from Leonard's coat, the smudged sconce, the sedative vial, Eleanor's diary, and Dr. Finch's confession of a missing vial head, woven a tight net around Leonard Grayson, driven by financial ruin and the threat of a revised will. Yet, one piece remained elusive, definitive proof of Eleanor's intent to disinherit Leonard, which could solidify his motive beyond doubt. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Miss Lavinia Reed, Eleanor's frail aunt, whose grief and cryptic remarks hinted at a secret that might complete the puzzle. Miss Marple rose early, dressing in a sober charcoal frock, her black lace shawl draped. Over her shoulders, her knitting bag, a constant companion. She sat by her guest-room window, the faint glow of dawn illuminating her notebook, where she had jotted her observations in a neat, spidery hand. The diary entry, Elle's temper worsens. Must see Hargreaves and Mrs. Wentworth's account of a draft will name in Miss Marple as a beneficiary pointed to. Eleanor's determination to protect her fortune. Dr. Finch's admission that Leonard had access to a dangerous sedative, likely used to disorient Eleanor, provided the method. The button and staircase marks placed Leonard at the scene. But Miss Reed's tearful outburst, "I should have spoken," suggested she held knowledge of Eleanor's plans. Perhaps a document or conversation that could seal Leonard's guilt. Descending to the dining room, Miss Marple found breakfast. A sombre affair. Leonard Grayson, his face etched with strain, was present but silent, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting interruption. The remaining guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, Mr. and Mrs. Percival Tate, and Miss Redate, mechanically, their conversation limited to polite murmurs. Miss Marple, taking a seat near the fire, sipped her tea, her mild gaze noting Leonard's tension and Miss Reed's trembling hands, clutching a silver locket. Dr. Finch avoided her eyes, his tic a constant twitch, while the Tates whispered nervously, their bags packed for an imminent departure. Mrs. Wentworth, ever-observant, cast speculative glances at Leonard, her lips pursed as if restraining a flood of gossip. Miss Marple's plan was twofold: to draw out Miss Reed's secret, which she suspected involved a will or letter, and to secure the sedative vial for analysis, perhaps through a discreet inquiry to the village chemist. She began with Miss Reed, whose proximity to Eleanor made her a likely confidant. After breakfast, as the guests dispersed, Miss Marple approached the elderly woman in the drawing-room, where she sat by the window, staring at the snow-covered garden. "Miss Reed," Miss Marple said, settling beside her with a gentle smile, "you've borne this loss so bravely. Eleanor was dear to you, and I sense you carry a heavy burden. Might you share it with an old woman who wishes only to honor her memory?" Miss Reed's rheumy eyes met hers, brimming with unshed tears. Her voice, when she spoke, was a fragile whisper, barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "You're kind, Miss Marple, kinder than I deserve. Eleanor was my heart, my sister's only child. I failed her, keeping silent when I should have. Warned her. She knew, you see, she knew Leonard's heart was cold, greedy. She told me things I swore to keep secret, but now, oh, now she's gone." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, their rhythm a soothing encouragement. "Secrets can be heavy, my dear," she said, "but sharing them can lighten the load. What did Eleanor tell you? Was it about her marriage, perhaps, or her plans for her fortune?" Miss Reed's fingers tightened around her locket, her breath hitching. "It was both, Miss Marple. 2 weeks ago, she came to my room, late at night, when the house was quiet. She was pale, trembling, said she'd found proof of Leonard's ruined debts he'd hidden, letters from men demanding payment. She said he'd been cruel, gripping her arm so tightly it bruised, demanding she sign over her trust. She refused, and that's when she decided she wrote a new will, Miss Marple, to cut him out entirely." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. "A new will, you say? Did she show it to you, or tell you where it was kept?" Miss Reed nodded, her voice gaining strength. She showed me the draft, written in her own hand, signed and dated. She said she'd send it to Mr. Hargreaves, her solicitor, after Christmas, but she wanted it safe until then. She hid it in her jewelry box, in a secret compartment, and made me promise not to tell. She named you Miss Marple, as her heir said you were sensible, would use her fortune for good. She was so afraid Leonard would find it, and I saw him that night near her room before the party. I should have spoken, but I was afraid. Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. The will, if it existed, was the linchpin, a concrete motive for Leonard to act before Eleanor could formalize her intentions. You did what you thought best, she said gently. But this jewelry box, do you know where it is now? It could be important to ensure Eleanor's wishes are honored. Miss Reed's eyes widened, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's in her boudoir, on the dressing table. I haven't dared look, but if it's gone, oh, Miss Marple, he must have taken it. Miss Marple thanked her, her resolve hardening. She excused herself, citing a need to rest, but instead made her way to the servants' hall to enlist Betsy's help. The housemaid, found polishing brass in the pantry, greeted her with a shy smile. Miss Marple, you're always about, ain't you? What's it now? Betsy, Miss Marple said, her tone conspiratorial. I need your help with a delicate matter. Miss Reed mentioned a jewelry box in Mrs. Grayson's boudoir with a secret compartment. Could you fetch it for me, quietly? It's for Eleanor's sake, to ensure her wishes are respected. Betsy's eyes sparkled with intrigue, and she nodded. I know the box, Miss Silver, with roses on the lid. I'll get it, quick as a wink, and no one'll know. She darted off, returning minutes later with the box, its intricate design gleaming in the dim light. Miss Marple thanked her, slipping upstairs to her room to examine it in private. The jewelry box, heavy and ornate, yielded to her careful probing. A hidden catch, concealed beneath a rose motif, opened a small compartment. Inside was a folded paper, yellowed at the edges, but empty save for a torn corner bearing the initials. LG in Eleanor's elegant script. The will was gone, likely taken by Leonard, but the torn fragment was evidence of its existence, and his knowledge of it. Miss Marple tucked the fragment into her knitting bag alongside the vial button and holly leaf, her mind piecing together the sequence. Leonard, discovering the draft will, had acted swiftly, using the sedative to stage an accident before Eleanor could formalize her intentions. Her next task was to safeguard the sedative vial, which she suspected contained traces of the dangerous compound Dr. Finch had mentioned. She decided to visit the village chemist, Mr. Potts, under the pretense of needing a tonic for nerves. Wrapping the vial in her handkerchief, she slipped it into her bag and set out, the snow crunching under her boots as she navigated the icy lanes. Mr. Potts, a jovial man with a bushy beard, welcomed her into his small shop, its shelves lined with bottles and jars. Miss Marple, a pleasure, he said, adjusting his spectacles. What can I do for you? A tonic, perhaps, for these trying days. Indeed, Mr. Potts, she replied, her smile disarming. But I've a curious question. I found a vial in my cousin's room, poor Eleanor Grayson, and wondered if you might identify its contents. It's a sedative, I believe, from Dr. Finch, but I'd like to be sure it's safe. Mr. Potts frowned, taking the vial with care. A sedative, you say? Let's have a look. He examined the label, then opened the vial, sniffing its faint residue. Smells like a barbiturate, but stronger than Dr. Finch's usual prescriptions. I'd need to test it properly, mix it with a reagent, check for compounds. Could take a day, Miss Marple, but I'll be discreet, as you ask." Miss Marple thanked him, her heart racing. If Mr. Potts confirmed a dangerous sedative, it would prove Leonard's tampering, linking the vial to Dr. Finch's missing compound. She returned to Holly House, her mind buzzing with possibilities, but cautious of Leonard's growing agitation. In the afternoon, she joined the guests for tea, hoping to gauge Leonard's behavior. He was present, his manners impeccable but his eyes wary, lingering on Miss Marple as if sensing her scrutiny. Mrs. Wentworth, ever talkative, recounted village gossip, while the Tates announced their departure for London, unable to bear the house's gloom. Dr. Finch remained silent, his tic a constant reminder of his guilt. Miss Reed, clutching her locket, avoided Leonard's gaze, her fear palpable. Miss Marple steered the conversation to Eleanor's generosity, probing for reactions. "Eleanor was so kind," she said, "always planning for others. I heard she intended to support a charity, perhaps through her will. Did she ever mention such plans, Miss Reed?" Miss Reed started, her locket slipping from her fingers. She did speak of helping others," she stammered, "but I don't know details. She was private about such things." Her eyes flicked to Leonard, who stiffened, his teacup clattering against its saucer. Leonard's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Eleanor's affairs are my concern, Miss Marple. I'd prefer we not speculate on matters best left to the solicitor." His tone was polite, but his eyes held a warning, a glint of desperation that Miss Marple noted with interest. She inclined her head, her smile placid. "Of course, Mr. Grayson, I meant no intrusion." But her mind was alight. Leonard's reaction confirmed his fear of the will's discovery, suggesting he had indeed taken it from the jewelry box. The torn fragment, with his initials, was a silent accusation, but she needed to place it in context, perhaps by confronting him indirectly as tea ended. Miss Marple slipped into the library, hoping to find more evidence of Leonard's financial straits. The desk, cluttered with papers, yielded a telegram from a creditor, dated the day before Christmas. Payment overdue. Legal action imminent. It was further proof of Leonard's desperation, a spur to act before Eleanor could disinherit him. She replaced the telegram, her heart pounding, and returned to the drawing room, where Leonard was now absent, reportedly on a call with his solicitor. Seizing the moment, she approached Miss Reed again, finding her alone by the fire. "Miss Reed," she said softly, "you've been so brave, sharing Eleanor's secret. The jewelry box was empty, but I found a torn paper with Leonard's initials. Do you think he knew of the will? Perhaps took it to prevent its execution?" Miss Reed's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. "He must have, Miss Marple. I saw him in her boudoir the morning of the party, rummaging through her things. Thought he was looking for a gift, but now, oh, he's wicked, wicked." Her sobs broke the silence, and Miss Marple comforted her, her resolve hardening. Returning to her room, Miss Marple sat by the window. Her knitting resumed, the clues de riz, vial, button, holly leaf, torn fragment, and Miss Reed's testimonial, lined like pieces of a mosaic. Leonard had discovered the will, stolen it, and used the sedative to stage Eleanor's fall, securing her fortune before she could act. The chemist's analysis, if it confirmed the dangerous compound, would be the final nail. But Leonard's wariness suggested he sensed the net tightening, and Miss Marple knew she must act swiftly, yet cautiously, to bring justice to Holly House. As the snow fell once more, she planned her next move, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. Chapter 8. The trap is set. The 6th day at Holly House dawned with a fragile stillness. The snow that blanketed St. Mary Mead, now frozen into a crystalline crust under a pale, unyielding sky. The village, subdued by the tragedy of Eleanor Grayson's death, whispered of the inquest that had concluded the previous afternoon, affirming the coroner's verdict of accidental death. Yet within the grand residence, the air thrummed with an unspoken tension, as if the walls themselves sensed the truth Miss Jane Marple was steadily uncovering. Her collection of clues, the scuff marks and holly leaf from the staircase, the black button from Leonard Grayson's coat, the smudged sconce, the sedative vial, Eleanor's diary, the torn fragment of a will, and Miss Reed's testimony had woven a damning case against Leonard, driven by his financial ruin and the threat of disinheritance. The chemist, Mr. Potts, had promised to analyze the vials, residue by evening, potentially confirming the presence of a dangerous sedative. With this final piece pending, Miss Marple resolved to set a trap to elicit Leonard's confession. A delicate maneuver to expose his guilt without endangering herself or others. Miss Marple rose early, dressing in a sombre plum frock, her black lace shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting bag a repository for her clues and notebook. She sat by her guest room window, the faint light of dawn illuminating her neat handwriting as she reviewed her strategy. Leonard's wariness, evident in his sharp rebuke at tea the previous day, suggested he suspected scrutiny, but his desperation, overheard in his frantic calls to his solicitor, made him vulnerable. She would gather the guests for a memorial, gathering ostensibly to honor Eleanor, but use the occasion to plant a seed of doubt, a fabricated clue to provoke Leonard into revealing himself. The torn fragment of the will, with his initials, would be her bait, presented as a newfound discovery to unsettle him. Descending to the morning room, Miss Marple found breakfast a strained affair. Leonard was present, his face a mask of controlled grief, though his eyes flickered with unease as he met her gaze. The remaining guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, and Miss Lavinia Redate, in silence. The Tates having departed for London the previous evening. Dr. Finch's tic was relentless, his hands trembling as he avoided Miss Marple's eyes, while Mrs. Wentworth cast speculative glances at Leonard, her gossip restrained by the sombre mood. Miss Reed, clutching her locket, seemed diminished, her frail frame hunched as if bearing the weight of her secret. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, proposed her plan with disarming simplicity. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice gentle, "I've been thinking of Eleanor, how she loved bringing people together. Might we hold a small gathering this evening to share memories of her? It would comfort us all, I think, and honor her spirit." Leonard hesitated, his fingers tightening round his cup. "A gathering," he said, his tone guarded. "The funeral is tomorrow, Miss Marple. I'm not sure it's appropriate." Mrs. Wentworth, eager for any diversion, clapped her hands. "Oh, but it's a lovely idea. Eleanor would have adored it, a chance to celebrate her warmth, her laughter. Please, Leonard, let's do it." Miss Reed nodded, her voice barely audible. "For Eleanor, yes, it's right." Dr. Finch, cornered by their enthusiasm, murmured assent, his tic flaring. Leonard, outnumbered, relented with a stiff nod. "Very well. This evening, in the drawing room. But keep it brief, 5 matters to attend to." His eyes lingered on Miss Marple, a glint of suspicion that she met with a bland smile. After breakfast, Miss Marple enlisted Mrs. Dobbs to arrange the drawing room. requesting a simple setup, chairs in a circle, a table with sherry and biscuits, and Eleanor's portrait prominently displayed. She then sought out Betsy, hoping to confirm Leonard's movements on Christmas Eve, particularly his presence in Eleanor's boudoir. The housemaid, found in the scullery scrubbing pots, greeted her with a shy grin. "Betsy," Miss Marple said, settling onto a stool, "you've been such a help. I was wondering about Christmas Eve, before the tragedy. Miss Reed mentioned seeing Mr. Grayson in Mrs. Grayson's boudoir. Did you notice him there, perhaps earlier in the day?" Betsy's eyes widened, her hands pausing. I did. That morning, I was dusting the upstairs hall, and I saw him come out of her boudoir, looking right furtive. He shut the door quick, like he didn't want to be seen. I thought maybe he was planning a surprise, it being Christmas, but now, it's queer, ain't it? "Very queer," Miss Marple agreed, her heart quickening. "And did you see him? With anything papers, perhaps, or a small box?" Betsy frowned, her memory straining. "Not a box, miss, but he had a paper in his hand, folded up tight. I couldn't see what it was, but he tucked it in his pocket and hurried off. I didn't think much of it then, but with all that's happened," she trailed off. Her face paling. Miss Marple thanked her, slipping a peppermint from her bag as a small token. The paper, likely the draft will, confirmed Leonard's discovery of Eleanor's plans, a catalyst for his actions. Returning to her room, she reviewed her clues, ensuring each was secure. The vial now with Mr. Potts, the button matched to Leonard's coat, the holly leaf, evidence of a struggle, the diary revealing Eleanor's fears, and the torn fragment, proof of the will's existence. The trap, she decided, would hinge on the fragment, presented as a recent find to provoke Leonard's reaction. In the afternoon, she visited the village chemist, Mr. Potts, to check on the vial's analysis. His shop, warm and cluttered, smelled of herbs and antiseptic. He greeted her with a grave nod, his beard twitching as he produced a notepad. "Miss Marple, I've tested the residue, as promised. It's a barbiturate, all right, but far stronger than Dr. Finch's usual prescriptions. There's traces of a compound pentobarbital. I'd wager that's dangerous in excess, especially mixed with alcohol. It'd cause dizziness, confusion, even collapse if overdosed. I've written it up, if you need a report." Miss Marple's heart leaped, though her expression remained composed. "Thank you, Mr. Potts. Your discretion is appreciated. You hold the report until I call for it. It's a delicate matter, for Eleanor's sake." He agreed, and she left, the confirmation of pentobarbital, a final nail in Leonard's coffin. The sedative, stolen from Dr. Finch's surgery and added to Eleanor's dose, had ensured her disorientation, making the staged fall plausible. Back at Holly House, she prepared for the evening, her plan clear: to unsettle Leonard with a fabricated story, using the torn fragment as bait, and observe his reaction, hoping for a misstep. The drawing room, transformed for the memorial, was softly lit, the fire casting a warm glow over Eleanor's portrait. The guests gathered at 7, their faces a mix of grief and unease. Leonard stood by the mantel, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room. Dr. Finch hovered near the door, his tick relentless, while Mrs. Wentworth, in a subdued grey gown, sipped sherry with forced cheer. Miss Reed sat by the fire, her locket clutched tightly, her eyes avoiding Leonard. Miss Marple, seated near the portrait, held her knitting, her demeanour serene but her mind alert. She began with a gentle tribute, her voice carrying a quiet authority. Eleanor was a light in this house, her kindness unmatched. I thought we might share memories, to keep her spirit close, but I confess I've been troubled by her loss, and I've found myself wondering about that night. So many small things, unnoticed at the time, can tell a story. Mrs. Wentworth, eager to contribute, recounted Eleanor's love of charades, her laughter filling the room. Miss Reed, trembling, spoke of Eleanor's childhood, her voice breaking. Dr. Finch, prompted by Miss Marple's gentle nudge, mumbled about her vitality, his eyes fixed on the floor. Leonard remained silent, his fingers gripping his glass, his face a mask of restraint. Miss Marple seized the moment, her tone conversational but deliberate. I've been reading old mysteries, you know, and they remind me how accidents can hide darker truths. In one story, a woman fell from a balcony, blamed on wine, but a hidden letter revealed her husband's plot. He'd drugged her, loosened a rail, staged it all. Curious, isn't it, how such things mirror life? I found something odd myself. Just yesterday, a torn paper in Eleanor's boudoir with initials that puzzled me. It seemed important, perhaps, a note or a will, but I've not made sense of it yet. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, lingering on Leonard. His face drained of colour, his glass trembling so violently that sherry sloshed onto his cuff. A paper, he said, his voice hoarse. What nonsense is this, Miss Marple? Eleanor's affairs are private, and I won't have you stirring trouble with your fancies. Mrs. Wentworth gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Dr. Finch shrank back, his tick a frantic rhythm. Miss Reed's eyes widened, her locket slipping to the floor. Miss Marple, unruffled, continued, her voice calm. No trouble, Mr. Grayson, merely an old woman's curiosity. The paper had initials, LG, and I thought it might relate to her plans. She was so generous, perhaps planning a legacy. I've left it on the hall table for the solicitor to see. It's likely nothing, but one never knows. Leonard's eyes narrowed, a flicker of panic betraying his composure. You're meddling. Miss Marple and I won't stand for it. This gathering is over. He strode from the room, his footsteps echoing in the hall, and Miss Marple noted the direction toward the hall table, where she had deliberately placed a blank paper as decoy. She excused herself, citing fatigue, but slipped into the shadows of the library, which overlooked the hall. From behind a curtain, she watched as Leonard approached the table, his movements frantic as he seized the paper, unfolding it with trembling hands. Finding it blank, his face contorted in a mix of relief and rage, and he muttered, "Damn her, poking where she doesn't belong." He crumpled the paper, tossing it into the fire, and stormed upstairs, unaware of Miss Marple's silent observation. Returning to the drawing-room, she found the guests shaken, Mrs. Wentworth whispering excitedly to Miss Reed. Dr. Finch had fled. To his room, his guilt overwhelming. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her heart steady despite the risk she had taken. Leonard's reaction, his panic, his rush to check the paper confirmed his knowledge of the will and his fear of exposure. The trap had worked, revealing his guilt, but she needed to secure his confession to ensure justice as night fell. She sat in her room, her knitting idle, her notebook open. She penned a letter to Constable Reed, outlining her findings and requesting his presence the following morning, with the chemist's report as evidence. The clues vial, button, leaf, diary, fragment, and Leonard's behavior formed an unbreakable chain, but she must act swiftly before Leonard's desperation turned to violence. She hid the letter in her bag, alongside the true fragment, and retired, her mind alert to the sounds of the house, knowing the final act was near. The snow, beginning to fall again, cloaked Holly House in silence. But Miss Marple's resolve burned bright, a beacon of justice in the darkness of deceit. Chapter 9. The confession. The seventh day at Holly House broke with a heavy, oppressive stillness. The snow that had fallen through the night piling high against the windows of St. Mary Mead, casting the village in a ghostly pallor. The grand residence, once vibrant with Christmas cheer, now stood as a mausoleum, its faded decorations a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded. Miss Jane Marple, rising before dawn, sat at her guest-room desk, her knitting bag open beside her. Its contents, the sedative vial, the black button, the holly leaf, Eleanor's diary, and the torn fragment of the will laid out like pieces of a chessboard. The previous evening's trap had worked flawlessly. Leonard Grayson's panicked reaction to the fabricated clue of a torn paper had betrayed his guilt, his frantic search for it revealing his fear of exposure. With the chemist's report confirming the presence of pentobarbital in the vial, Miss Marple held all the evidence needed to confront Leonard. But she knew the final move required precision to secure his confession and ensure justice for Eleanor. She, dressed in a somber black frock, her lace shawl draped over her shoulders, her appearance as unassuming as ever. Her notebook, filled with meticulous observations, lay open, detailing the sequence of clues, the scuff marks and holly leaf suggesting a struggle, the button linking Leonard to the staircase, the smudged sconce indicating premeditation, the diary and Miss Reed's testimony revealing Eleanor's intent to disinherit him, and Dr. Finch's confession of a stolen sedative. The torn fragment, with Leonard's initials, proved he had stolen the draft will, and the chemist's analysis confirmed he had tampered with Eleanor's medication to stage her fall. Yet, to bring the truth to light, Miss Marple needed Leonard to admit his crime, ideally in the presence of witnesses, to counter any attempt to dismiss her findings as an old woman's fancy. Her plan was to gather the household for a final discussion, under the guise of sharing her departure plans, and confront Leonard with the evidence, pressing him until his composure cracked. She had already sent her letter to Constable Reed, requesting his presence that morning with the chemist's report, ensuring official backing. The risk was considerable. Leonard's desperation made him unpredictable, but Miss Marple's resolve was unshaken, tempered by years of unravelling human deceit in St. Mary Mead. Descending to the morning room, she found breakfast a tense affair, the air thick with unspoken dread. Leonard Grayson sat at the head of the table, his face pale but composed, his eyes darting to Miss Marple with a wariness that bordered on hostility. The remaining guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, and Miss Lavinia Reed, subdued, their appetites diminished by the lingering shadow of Eleanor's death. Dr. Finch's tic was a relentless twitch, his hands fumbling with his fork, while Mrs. Wentworth, unusually quiet, cast nervous glances at Leonard. Miss Reed, clutching her locket, seemed to shrink into her chair, her eyes avoiding confrontation. Miss Marple, taking a seat by the window, sipped her tea, her mild demeanour masking the intensity of her purpose. After breakfast, she approached Mrs. Dobbs, the housekeeper, with a request to assemble the household in the drawing-room at 11, citing a need to discuss her departure and share final thoughts on Eleanor's memory. Mrs. Dobbs, weary but obliging, agreed, and Miss Marple spent the morning preparing, reviewing her notebook and ensuring her clues were secure. She slipped the torn fragment into her pocket, its presence a silent accusation, and hid the vial and diary in a locked drawer, trusting Constable Reed to retrieve them later. At 11, the drawing room was ready, its heavy curtains drawn to admit a weak, wintry light. Eleanor's portrait hung above the mantel, her serene gaze a poignant reminder of the stakes. The guests filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Leonard stood by the fire, his posture rigid, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Dr. Finch hovered near the door, his tick a frantic rhythm, while Mrs. Wentworth settled onto a sofa, her eyes bright with anticipation. Miss Reed took a chair by the window, her locket clutched like a talisman. Miss Marple, seated near the portrait, held her knitting, its needles idle for once, her notebook open in her lap. She began with a gentle preamble, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "My dear friends, I'll be leaving Holly House tomorrow, and I felt it right to gather us one last time, to honor Eleanor and reflect on her loss. But I confess, my heart is heavy, for I cannot accept that her death was a mere accident. I've seen too much of human nature in my little village to believe the surface of things. Small details, overlooked by others, tell a different story, one of calculation, not chance." Leonard's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. "Miss Moff, this is hardly the time for your theories. The coroner ruled it an accident, and I won't have Eleanor's memory tarnished by idle speculation." Mrs. Wentworth gasped, her hand fluttering to her throat, while Dr. Finch shrank back, his face ashen. Miss Reed's locket slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Miss Marple, unruffled, continued, her tone calm but relentless. "I understand your grief, Mr. Grayson, but truth is the best tribute to Eleanor. Let me share what I've found, and you may judge for yourselves. On the staircase, I discovered scuff marks and a holly leaf, suggesting a struggle, not a simple fall. A black button from your coat, Mr. Grayson, was found at the scene, placing you there. The sconce dimmed that night, was tampered with, creating shadows to hide your actions." Leonard's face flushed, his voice rising. "This is absurd. A button marks Gorman, things in any house. You're weaving fancies, Miss Marple, and I'll not stand for it." She pressed on, her gaze steady. "There's more, I'm afraid. Eleanor's diary revealed her fear of you, her discovery of your debts, and her plan to meet her solicitor, Mr. Hargreaves, to revise her will. Miss Reed confirmed she drafted a new will, naming me as heir to protect her fortune from your ruin. A torn fragment, with your initials, proves you found and stole it, fearing dissident." Leonard's hands clenched, his voice a snarl. "Lies. You've no proof, only an old woman's meddling. That fragment means nothing. Lena wrote many notes, none of them a will." Miss Marple's needles twitched, though they remained still. "Perhaps, but there's the sedative, prescribed by Dr. Finch at your insistence, a stronger dose than needed. The chemist, Mr. Potts, found pentobarbital in the vial from Eleanor's boudoir, a dangerous compound, stolen from Dr. Finch's surgery, where you were alone. It caused her dizziness, her confusion, ensuring she'd falter on the stairs. You gave her the dose, Mr. Grayson, in her wine, and pushed her, staging an accident to secure her fortune." Dr. Finch gasped, his tick stopping as he stammered, "I told you, Miss Marple, he pressured me. I didn't know he'd steal the vial, I swear." His confession, wrung from panic, hung in the air, a damning echo. Leonard's face contorted, his voice a roar. "Enough. You've no right, no evidence. This is slander, and I'll have you out of my house." He stepped toward her, his fists raised, but Miss Marple remained seated, her eyes unyielding. At that moment, the door opened, and Constable Reed entered, his young face grim, the chemist's report in hand. "Mr. Grayson," he said, "I've heard enough. And I've got Mr. Potts's findings pentobarbital, just as Miss Marple said. You're to come with me, sir, for questioning." Leonard froze, his eyes wild, trapped like a fox in a snare. The room was silent, the guests staring in stunned horror. Mrs. Wentworth clutched her pearls. Miss Reed sobbed quietly, and Dr. Finch buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple, her voice soft but firm, delivered the final blow. "You knew Eleanor planned to disinherit you, Mr. Grayson. You found her will, stole it, and used the sedative to ensure her fall. But the truth, like the snow outside, cannot be swept away. Confess, for Eleanor's sake, and spare us further pain." Leonard's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling under the weight of the evidence. He sank into a chair, his voice a broken whisper. I couldn't lose everything. The debts, they were crushing me. She was going to take it all, my life, my future. I found a will, yes, in her jewelry box. I begged her to reconsider, but she laughed, said I'd never touch her money. That night, I put the sedative in her wine, more than she'd ever taken. I followed her upstairs, waited at the top. She was unsteady, swaying. I pushed her, just a nudge, and she fell. I thought it would look like an accident, that no one would know. The room gasped, Mrs. Wentworth's cry piercing the silence. Miss Reed wept openly, her locket forgotten on the floor. Dr. Finch, trembling, muttered, "I should have stopped him. I should have known." Constable Reed stepped forward, his notebook open, his voice steady. "That's enough, Mr. Grayson. You're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Grayson. Come with me, sir." Leonard rose, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. As Constable Reed led him away, the drawing room seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating like mist. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her heart heavy but resolute. She approached Miss Reed, returning the locket with a gentle pat. "You were brave, my dear, to share her secret. It helped bring her justice." Mrs. Wentworth, recovering her voice, seized Miss Marple's arm. "My dear Miss Marple, you're a marvel. How did you see it all when we were blind?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I only observe, Mrs. Wentworth, as one does in a village. People are much the same, whether in St. Mary, Mead, or Holly House. Their hearts betray them if one listens." She excused herself, slipping upstairs to retrieve the diary and vial, which she handed to Constable Reed for safekeeping. The button, leaf, and fragment she kept, intending to return them to the house as mementos of a truth uncovered. As she packed her bag, preparing to leave the following morning, she reflected on the fragility of trust and the resilience of justice. Leonard's confession, wrung from the pressure of her trap, had closed the case, but the Costolino's life, the household's peace, was a reminder of the darkness that could lurk behind festive lights. Sitting by her window, her knitting resumed, Miss Marple watched the snow fall, its quiet descent a contrast to the storm she had navigated. The drawing-room confession, witnessed by all, ensured Leonard's fate, and Holly House could begin to heal. She penned a final note to her friend Dolly Bantry, describing the case with her usual brevity, her needles clicking as she concluded, "Evil hides, but not from those who see the human heart." With that, she retired, her mind at rest, ready to return to the quiet of St. Mary Mead, where new stories, no doubt, awaited her keen observation. Chapter 10. The aftermath. The 8th morning at Holly House greeted St. Mary Mead with a tentative thaw, the snow that had cloaked the village for days beginning to soften under a pale sun, the grand residence, its festive trappings now stripped away, stood silent, as if exhaling after the storm of revelation that had culminated in Leonard Grayson's confession the previous day. Miss Jane Marple, preparing to depart, stood at her guest-room window, her knitting bag packed, her notebook tucked safely inside. The case was closed. Leonard, arrested for Eleanor's murder, faced justice. His guilt laid bare by the evidence she had meticulously gathered: the scuff marks, holly leaf, black button, smudged sconce, sedative vial, diary, torn will fragment, and the chemist's report. Yet the aftermath lingered, a delicate tapestry of grief, relief, and the slow mending of a fractured household. Miss Marple's task now was to ensure Eleanor's legacy was honoured and to tie the final threads of the tragedy before returning to the quiet of St. Mary Mead. She dressed in a simple grey frock, her black laced shawl draped over her shoulders, her appearance as unassuming as ever. Her thoughts, however, were far from idle. Sifting through the events of the past week, the Christmas Eve gathering, Eleanor's fatal fall, the coroner's hasty verdict, and her own relentless pursuit of the truth. Leonard's confession. He had drugged Eleanor's wine with a stolen sedative and pushed her down the stairs to secure her fortune, had shocked the household, but it was the small, overlooked details that had unravelled his crime. The bruise on Eleanor's wrist, the dazed look Mrs. Wentworth noted, and Miss Reed's secret about the hidden will had all pointed to a calculated act, disguised as an accident. Now, with justice served, Miss Marple turned her attention to the living, ensuring the wounds left by Leonard's deceit could begin to heal. Descending to the morning room, she found breakfast a sombre but lighter affair than the days prior. The guests, Dr. Harold Finch, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, and Miss Lavinia Reed, were subdued but relieved, their faces softened by the resolution of the mystery. Leonard's absence, now permanent, lifted a shadow from the house, though loss remained a palpable ache. Dr. Finch, his tic less pronounced, managed a weak smile, his guilt oversupplying the sedative tempered by his cooperation with Miss Marple. Mrs. Wentworth, ever resilient, chatted softly about village matters, her gossip restrained by the gravity of the moment. Miss Reed, still frail, clutched her locket, her eyes brighter with the knowledge that Eleanor's memory had been honoured. Miss Marple, taking a seat by the fire, sipped her tea, her mild gaze noting the subtle shifts in their demeanour, a sign that Holly House could begin to recover. Her first task was to address Eleanor's fortune, which, according to Miss Reed and Mrs. Wentworth, had been intended for Miss Marple in a revised will. The draft, stolen by Leonard, was gone, but the torn fragment and Miss Reed's testimony confirmed Eleanor's wishes. Miss Marple, however, had no intention of claiming the inheritance. Her life in St. Mary Mead was simple, her needs modest, and she believed Eleanor's wealth could serve a greater purpose. She resolved to meet with Mr. Hargreaves, Eleanor's solicitor, to propose redirecting the fortune to a village charity, perhaps one supporting orphan children, a cause Eleanor had championed in life. After breakfast, Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Dobbs, the housekeeper, to arrange a call to Mr. Hargreaves. Mrs. Dobbs, bustling in the pantry, greeted her with a weary but genuine smile. "Miss Marple, you've done wonders for this house, bringing truth to light. We're all grateful, though it's a bitter pill." "You're very kind, Mrs. Dobbs," Miss Marple replied, her smile warm. I wonder if you might help me contact Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor. I'd like to discuss Eleanor's estate to ensure her wishes are fulfilled. Could you place a call from the library telephone?" Mrs. Dobbs nodded, leading her to the library, where the heavy oak desk and leather-bound volumes stood as silent witnesses to the case. The call was brief but productive. Mr. Hargreaves, a precise man with a clipped voice, confirmed that Eleanor's existing will left her fortune to Leonard, but he was aware of her recent inquiries about revisions. Miss Marple explained the draft will, Miss Reed's testimony, and Leonard's confession, proposing that the estate be redirected to a charity in Eleanor's name. Mr. Hargreaves, intrigued, agreed to meet that afternoon, promising to bring documents to facilitate the transfer. Given Leonard's disqualification due to his crime, with the call concluded, Miss Marple turned her attention to the guests, seeking to offer comfort and closure before her departure. She found Miss Reed in the conservatory, tending a wilting fern with trembling hands. The elderly woman's face lit up at Miss Marple's approach, her locket gleaming in the soft light. "Miss Reed," Miss Marple said, settling onto a wicker chair, "you've been so strong through this ordeal. I wanted you to know that Eleanor's fortune will be used for good, as she wished. I've spoken to Mr. Hargreaves, and will establish a charity in her name for children in need. I believe it's what she would have wanted." Miss Reed's eyes filled with tears, her voice a whisper. "Oh, Miss Marple, you've given her peace. She loved children, always wanted to help them. I failed her, keeping silent, but you've made it right." She clutched Miss Marple's hand, her gratitude palpable. Miss Marple patted her gently, her heart warmed by the connection. "You did your part, my dear, sharing her secret. It was the key to justice. Eleanor would be proud." She left Miss Reed with a renewed sense of purpose, her frail frame seeming less burdened. Next, she sought Mrs. Wentworth, who was in the drawing-room, arranging fresh flowers in a vase, a small act of defiance against the house's gloom. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Wentworth exclaimed, her mauve gown rustling, "you're a miracle, my dear, solving this dreadful business. The village is buzzing Leonard's arrest, your cleverness. Tell me, how did you know?" Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly as she settled beside her. "I only observed, Mrs. Wentworth, as one does in a village. People reveal themselves, in their words, their glances. Eleanor's fear, Leonard's desperation, the small signs on the staircase, they told a story, if one listened. I'm glad it's over, for her sake." Double quotes. Mrs. Wentworth leaned closer, her eyes gleaming. "And the fortune, I heard Eleanor meant it for you. Will you keep it? Live grandly in St. Mary Mead?" Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Oh no, my dear. I've no need for grandeur. The money will go to a charity for children, as Eleanor wished. Holly House will have a legacy of kindness, not greed." Mrs. Wentworth clapped her hands, delighted. "Perfect. Eleanor would approve. You must visit us again, Miss Marple, to see the good it does." Miss Marple promised to write, leaving Mrs. Wentworth to her flowers, her spirits visibly lifted. Her final visit was to Dr. Finch, whom she found in the garden, bundled against the cold, staring at the frozen fountain. His tic was subdued, his face etched with remorse. "Dr. Finch," Miss Marple said, approaching with her gentle smile, "you've been through a great deal. I hope you're finding some peace, knowing the truth is out." Dr. Finch turned, his eyes haunted. "Peace? I don't deserve it, Miss Marple. I gave him the sedative, let him into my surgery. If I'd refused, Eleanor might be alive. How can I live with that? Miss Marple's voice was kind but firm. You were coerced, Doctor, by a man skilled in manipulation. You helped uncover his crime, and that counts for much. Eleanor would not want you to carry this guilt forever. Serve your patients. Make amends through your work. It's the best way to honor her. Dr. Finch's shoulders straightened, a flicker of hope in his eyes. You're right, Miss Marple. I'll try. Thank you for everything. She nodded, leaving him to his reflections, confident he would find his way. In the afternoon, Mr. Hargreaves arrived, a tall man with a briefcase and a brisk manner, in the library with Miss Reed and Mrs. Dobbs as witnesses. Miss Marple presented the torn fragment and recounted Miss Reed's testimony about the draft. Will, Mr. Hargreaves, satisfied, drafted a provisional agreement to redirect Eleanor's estate to a new charity, the Eleanor Grayson Fund for Children, pending legal formalities. Miss Marple signed a statement declining any claim, her signature neat and final. Miss Reed wept softly, and Mrs. Dobbs, usually stoic, dabbed her eyes, murmuring, Mrs. Grayson would be so proud. With the estate settled, Miss Marple prepared to depart, her train to St. Mary Mead scheduled for the following morning. She spent the evening in her room, packing her modest belongings, her knitting resumed as she reflected on the case. The clues had been subtle, the motives hidden in the folds of human greed, but her patience and observation had prevailed. Leonard's confession, elicited by her carefully set trap, had been the culmination, but the aftermath restoring hope to Holly House was equally vital. She penned a letter to Constable Reed, commending his diligence and enclosing a note for Mr. Potts, thanking him for his discreet analysis. As night fell, she joined the household for a quiet dinner, the atmosphere markedly lighter. Mrs. Wentworth proposed a toast to Eleanor, her voice steady, and even Dr. Finch managed a few words about her kindness. Miss Reed, her locket gleaming, spoke of the charity, her pride in Eleanor's legacy evident. Miss Marple, raising her glass, offered a simple sentiment to truth and to healing. The clink of glasses echoed, a small but significant step toward recovery. After dinner, Miss Marple slipped into the hall, pausing at the staircase where Eleanor had fallen. The scuff marks were gone, the carpet cleaned, but the memory lingered. She placed the holly leaf, now dried, on the table at the top, a silent tribute to Eleanor's spirit. The button, she returned to the cloakroom, its role in justice fulfilled. The diary and fragment she entrusted to Mr. Hargreaves for safekeeping, ensuring Eleanor's voice would be heard in the legal proceedings. Retiring to her room, she sat by the fire, her knitting a soft rhythm against the silence. The snow outside had ceased, the village settling into a quiet that felt like absolution. She thought of St. Mary Mead, her cottage, and her friend Dolly Bantry, who would no doubt demand every detail of the case over tea. The vicar's wife, too, would be agog, her curiosity a welcome contrast to the weight of Holly House. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking as she imagined their reactions to her tale of observation and deduction. The case, she mused, was a reminder of the fragility of trust, so easily shattered by greed, and the strength of justice, which could mend even the deepest wounds. Eleanor's death, though tragic, had not been in vain. Her fortune would uplift lives, her memory preserved in acts of kindness. Leonard's fate, sealed by his own actions, was a cautionary tale, one Miss Marple knew would linger in the villages. Collective memory, as she packed her knitting, she reflected on the human heart, so prone to error, yet capable of redemption. Dr. Finch would heal, Miss Reed would find solace, and Mrs. Wentworth would carry the story forward, a beacon of resilience. Holly House, scarred but enduring, would stand as a testament to the power of truth, its walls no longer hiding secrets. With her bag ready, Miss Marple extinguished the lamp, the fire's glow casting soft shadows. She slept soundly, her mind at peace, knowing she had honored Eleanor's memory and restored balance to a house torn by deceit. The train to St. Mary Mead awaited, and with it the quiet rhythms of home, where new stories, no doubt, would unfold under her watchful eye.